My name is Sophie Harrison, and I'm a Senior Account Manager at Newcomp Analytics. I'm going to be kicking things off and then passing it over to Mark from Alteryx, who is going to be giving an introduction from the Alteryx perspective. And then from there, Jason from Newcomp will be doing a demo of Alteryx workflows, which will then feed into a Tableau dashboard. I'd like to thank everyone for taking the time to join us today. I know with everything going on and us not being able to run live events and interact with you guys in person, we're trying to run as many virtual events as we can to keep everyone engaged in what's new in the analytics market and with Alteryx in particular. So of course, we want to be able to provide complimentary enablement this time, as well as office hours. So at the end of this webinar, we'll highlight some of the offerings that we have to be able to help you through these times, as well as other online Alteryx events that we're pretty excited about. So our objective today is to showcase how Alteryx can be leveraged really powerfully with Tableau. For those of you who are not aware, Alteryx is actually on the VOR for the Ontario government under the DIVA agreement. So as you're watching through this, just keep in mind that it is available to you guys for licenses, services, and training through that agreement. So you're happy to take a look at that or reach out to us with any questions that you might have in regards to that agreement. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with Newcomp Analytics, we're an end-to-end analytics provider that does software licensing, implementation services, strategic consulting, mentoring, and training for all aspects of analytics. So it's everything from analytics strategy to data warehouse development to cloud architecture, data engineering, business intelligence development, and data science. And as an Alteryx partner, we're really here to support both people who are considering Alteryx, as well as those that are existing clients. So if you're using Alteryx on a trial basis, our job is to make sure you have the support that you need through a guided trial to help solve those use cases you want to take on and answer any questions you might have about the licensing or the tool. A guided trial really means that we set up office hours with one of our technical resources, such as Jason, for an hour at a time to really walk you through those use cases and give you some hands-on, one-on-one time together to help you make sure that you're leveraging the tool to its fullest capability. So after this webinar, if you are on a trial of Alteryx, we're happy to get it extended to 30 days. Or if you'd like a trial and you're not set up yet, we can arrange for that as well. We're really here to support you through the trial period. And for existing clients, we can provide anything from best practices advice to implementation services, staff augmentation, training, mentoring, and those office hours are available to you guys as well. Set up a couple hours with one of our resources and help get through any of those issues that you're troubleshooting. As well as a Tableau Gold partner, we have witnessed firsthand really how Alteryx and Tableau fit hand in hand, and that's really what Jason's going to be showcasing later on in his demonstration. But at this point, I want to pass it over to Mark, who is going to be talking a little bit more about Alteryx.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Sophie. Really appreciate it. And thank you very much for those taking the time to join us this afternoon. My name is Mark Walsh with Alteryx Canada, located here in Toronto, and I've been working very closely with a number of your peers and colleagues across the OPS, and really look forward to spending some time with you today. And again, we'll save you from a bunch of slides. I promise I got 3 slides to go through before really getting into the Alteryx Designer and then showcasing the power of Alteryx by connecting to data, performing either ETL type functions, data transformation functions, all the way through to advanced analytics prior to directly connecting, outporting that to a Tableau consumable file or directly to a dashboard. So before I get into sort of Alteryx and our positioning in the market, I did want to speak to some just industry standards. And I think from my experiences of working with and supporting a number of agencies across OPS, I truly think, I think the times we're in, related to some of the changes we are faced to make based on our current circumstances with COVID, I think one would not disagree that data preparedness, data readiness is something that can be improved, and not only within the public sector. I think there are a lot of eye openers within the private sector as well. Although, again, based on my experiences, we can all agree that there is not a single source of data. IDC claims that 94% of organizations are pulling data from multiple sources, and my boss famously says either 6% were lying or didn't understand the question, because I have yet to see an analysis where all of the data comes from one source. So the idea of content sprawl is more true now than ever. 64% of analysts are actually using 5 or more sources of data. So that's a little bit more realistic, and based on some of the conversations, that's more aligned to some of the challenges that we're seeing today. Is that obviously there are different tools for different purposes, and there's silos of data across the organization, which are difficult to bring together in order to enhance the analysis that you're conducting. I love the 37% of data are wasting their time searching for data. So this isn't something that's going to be fixed overnight. So again, the idea that there are these silos of data repositories based on your role, function, access, I think that will continue to remain. Although what we're seeing is organizations that are acting on data allow more access to data, believe it or not. So there are governance policies in place that you are able to access what you should be able to access, but the idea of locking down these data silos is actually restricting the ability to perform advanced analytics. The last point here, I won't belittle, because I think this is the classic end-all be-all of folks that I work with across Ontario. Is great insights are frequently shared via Excel exports. So the idea that you do a bunch of work, and if you are so lucky enough to perform some machine learning or advanced analytics in a Python or R, an open source language, and then heads back to the business as an Excel file, where all of that logic and all of that governance is more or less thrown out the window. So those are some of the core industry points that I wanted to really focus on, and I think that positions very nicely for what Alteryx is positioning as pointing as a citizen data scientist. So we can move on to the next slide. And really, this speaks to what I think is almost a perfect storm for what I'm seeing across Ontario. Is we have a very, very skilled individuals that know their data and know the processes very, very well, although single-threaded in terms of their support as it relates to those advanced analytic and data science capabilities. So really, we're seeing, and I think the industry is and the market is very much aligning to really that data science persona is becoming the next true bottleneck of an IT kind of production line, right? So the idea of solely relying on a data science team in order to bring insights to your business is creating a bottleneck. And really what Alteryx and the whole idea of self-service analytics is bringing to the forefront is the idea of enabling people that are working with the data, that know the data, with a set of tools that allows them to bring the data together and start providing insights on that data without knowing how to code in R or Python. So again, the idea of democratizing the data science by providing access to the tools is essentially is exactly what Alteryx and Tableau have done within pockets across the OPS. So this slide really speaks to, we need to update it because it was last year we were at 1 million data scientists across planet Earth. And in a short time of 2025, that number is expected to to double optimistically. So again, 2 million data scientists to serve all of the data science requirements is just not sufficient. So that's really where a gap that Alteryx is helping address. Next slide, Jason, and I will just pass it over to you very shortly after. You likely have heard about APA if you've heard about Alteryx at all, or done any research on what Alteryx is within the marketplace. And APA is an announcement that we came out with. Alteryx released just last month, actually, May 21st. Our CEO went on a live stream and with IDC announced a new category called APA, Analytic Process Automation. Really what APA is defined as, again, from our customers, from our partners, and from market leaders and experts, they all jointly agreed that there is a need for a convergence of data, people, and process. So the idea of bringing advanced analytic capabilities to a data professional, the idea of automating many manual processes that are traditionally done in Excel and Access, and then most importantly, in my opinion, is upskilling people. So again, providing the people the right tools in order to start to upskill and again, be more productive and more proficient in their job and their role. Again, my boss famously says, many people wake up in the morning and love to copy paste or depend on pivot tables and VLOOKUPs. If that can be automated, why isn't it? So the picture here depicts the idea of automating a process from end to end. So by being able to pull content from regular files that you access or systems, applications, we're seeing more commonly for more advanced analytic organizations actually fully automating from an RPA bot. So having a bot go to a legacy system like a mainframe, be able to access the data, pull the data, and then as the RPA under-delivered a little bit as it relates to how clean that data is coming out, but having that trigger via an API call, an Alteryx workflow that would then start a normalization process or a predictive analytics use case. So the idea of stitching an automated process together is exactly what we are trying to deliver with our trusted partners like Newcomp. The last slide, I promise it is the last slide before I pass it over to Jason, is just a quick screenshot of some of the value and process automation that we've been able to achieve across OPS. So these are some actual estimated numbers for actually hour saves as it relates to workflows being built and put into production. So we've got a few folks on the line that would be able to speak to these in much more detail than I. Although a few that I would love to point out is the QA billing reconciliation. So again, this is within the environment team. They were able to completely or substantially reduce the manual efforts related to a bunch of Excel files, gathering data, and remove some of the manual intensive processes by building out an automated workflow. And estimated about close to 400 hours are saved annually on that use case. The other is the cost optimization, where, again, this is a great example of how Alteryx directly connects to Tableau. So the idea that calculations and comparisons and reconciliations of cost analysis associated with facilities is built out in the form of a workflow, and then simply at an ad hoc basis, files are updated, data sources are updated, and the logic remains the same. And it takes it right from a file, performs the transformations, and outputs it directly to either a TD or a hyperfile, or if there is an Alteryx server available, we can publish directly to Tableau server as well. So I thought that these we're going to show you the platform in action right now, but I thought that these were, if you take a few things away, the idea of automating a process is certainly one that I'd like you to start to think about. And obviously going back to some of Sophie's earlier comments, if you are leveraging a trial program, please let us know how we can leverage you to ensure, or leverage us to ensure that you're getting the most out of that trial program. If you are interested in connecting the data and start playing around with Alteryx and seeing some of the automation initiatives that can be addressed, please reach out to Sophie, myself, and we would be happy to work with you in order to get you set up with an extended trial in order to start performing some of those functions. Without further ado, I think I've taken up 10 too many minutes.
Thanks, Mark. Hi, everyone. My name is Jason Beckadam. I'm an analytics consultant at Newcomp Analytics. Today, I'm going to show you how to create this report. So just a very simple report with some stats about average rent in the area. So we have a map down here of all the areas that we're looking at. We have a breakdown of the average rent per unit type in a pie chart, and then we also have a breakdown of unit type just in a bar chart. So basically, the use case we're going to look at is, okay, we have this data in an Excel file. How can we prepare it and create an automated workflow that can basically feed into Tableau so that your Tableau developers or Tableau users can then build out this report? So the data that we're going to look at today is a little unstructured. It requires a lot of cleaning. So we have the location of our data here. We have for a bachelor in October 18th, what the cost of the average rent of that place was. We have that across the board here. So we have bachelor, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom in total. And what we're going to do is basically look at how we can create an automated process in Alteryx to reshape this data, reformat this data so that we can feed it into Tableau, our reporting tool, to be able to share this across your organization. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to open a fresh Alteryx workbook. And this is what you'll see when you open up Alteryx. There's a few things I want to point out here before we begin. The first is there's a nice blank space here, all in red. This is the canvas. This is where we're going to drag in our tools. Now, where are the tools? Right across the top here, we have a ton of tools. You'll notice all of these tools right here are blue. That's because Alteryx has conveniently divided the tools in different palettes. So the first palette that we're looking at is preparation. There's also an in and out palette if you want to import or export your data. There's a join palette for joining different data sources together. And there's a ton of different palettes all across the top here. Now, in general, these palettes are organized in a way that you'll want to use the palettes in order. So first, you're going to bring in some data. Then you're going to prepare some data, then you're going to join some data, then you might do a whole lot of different things, but you can also mix and match, and you'll see that we'll do that in a second. So to bring data into your Alteryx workflow, I'm going to go up to my in and out palette, and I'm going to drag in my input tool. Now, when you drag in a tool, there's something that happens on the side here. This is called your configuration window. Your configuration window is unique to your tool. And in this case, it's basically telling us how to configure this tool so that it can do its job. The first thing we see up here, it says connect a file or a database. So we can click on this drop-down menu and we can navigate to our file. So I'm going to select my file from my computer. But actually, I'll go back to there for 1 sec. On files, so these are all the different files that Alteryx supports, and you can see there's a ton of them, from JSON to your CSV to your Excel to your SAS file. You can name it, and Alteryx can bring it in. There's also data sources here that you can take a look at. These are just all your common servers that Alteryx can import from. Okay, so the file that we're working with today, like we saw earlier, was an Excel file. So I'm going to go to that Excel file. I'm going to select the table that the data is on. And then you'll see we have a nice little preview of our data on the side here. That's how we know we have the right sheet. Best practice in Alteryx is to bring in a tool called a browse tool whenever you bring in data. And what this browse tool is going to enable us to do is to check the data quality of our data. So when you bring in a tool, you can either bring it far away from your tool and connect both tools manually, or if you bring the browse tool close enough to your input tool, they'll automatically connect like so. Okay, so it says no data available. Use Control R to run the workflow. So yeah, you can press Control R, or there's a button up here at the top right called Run that will also run your workflow. When you run that, you can see it takes 0.1 seconds. Here we go. We can access this browse tool. So when I click on this browse tool, we now have a new configuration menu, but also at the bottom here, we have a nice look at our data set. So I'm going to pull this up. You can see we have our data set in a column format where we just have our columns that we saw in our Excel files. And this is really raw, okay? The other thing that I love about the browse tool is whenever you click on one of your columns here, you can actually get some diagnostics on that column. So I click on F2. Now you can see on the side here, we have some different information about our columns. 96% of this data is okay. 52% is uniques. You have 3% nulls. Okay, so we're going to have to deal with those nulls at some point. We know that. And then there's also just some length statistics about our data, just your very common average, min, max, and so on and so forth. So you can do that for every single column in order to check your data. Okay, so when I look at this data, I'm going to notice a few things that I need to fix. The first is my headers at the top here are just F2, F3, and F4. We need to change these headers to be something that actually makes sense. In this case, I'm looking at this Bachelor October 18th. That would be a nice header. The other thing is these F3 columns. We've done some research on this data, and these F3 column that says B, same with F5, F7, F9, these aren't required for any of our analysis, so we can get rid of those. And then the third thing that we need to keep in mind is in some of these data sets, there's actually stars being shown. And stars aren't, you can't use stars in Tableau, so we're gonna have to remove these down the line. All right, so we'll keep that in mind. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to skip the first 3 rows of my data set. To skip the first 3 rows of my data set, I'm going to go and take a tool called Sample. Sample enables us to choose a sample of our data set. In this case, we're going to do first 3 rows. So if you look on the left here, you have a whole lot of different options that you can use. You have your first n rows, last n rows, and skip first n rows, and a few other options. In this case, we're going to skip the first 3 rows, so n is going to equal to 3 here. And then to see the result of my tool, I'm going to run my workflow by clicking on Run. And here we go. When I click on the tool, you can now get a view of my data set. And I'm just seeing here that I chose first n rows instead of skip first rows. So we're going to skip the rows instead of choosing the first 3 rows. Okay, so now we have our new data right after running our tool. The great thing that I like about Alteryx is there's a feature called anchors. Every tool that we use will have anchors. Our input tool has an outbound anchor right here. Our browse tool has an inbound anchor. but our sample tool actually has an inbound and an outbound anchor. This is one of my favorite features of Alteryx that I think is subtle, but it's really awesome because you can see exactly how your data looks before by clicking on the inbound anchor. You can see we still have our nulls in our first 3 rows. But then when you click on your outbound anchor, we've now gotten rid of those nulls. Why is this really great? Well, you can see exactly how your tool is affecting your data at each step of the way. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to get rid of these columns here that are useless. So F3, F5, F7, basically every other column is useless to our data, so we're going to get rid of it. The tool that I like to use to do this is the select tool. So I'm going to click on the select tool. I'm going to bring it into my workflow. And from here in this configuration menu, we have a few different options. The first is we can select the fields that we'd like to keep. We can also change the type of data of each of our columns. We can rename them, and we can add a description to our fields. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to get rid of those columns, like I said. So the columns we're going to get rid of is F3, F5, F7, F9, F11, F13, F15, F17, F19, and F21. All right. I'm going to run this workflow and we're going to see what the result of our select tool is. So if I click on my outbound anchor, you'll now see that we have a lot less columns, and we can also get a review of what happened by clicking on the inbound anchor to look at our data. You can see it's much wider, and then our outbound anchor here to see our new data. Another thing that I like to tell people who first see Alteryx is you can actually add a note to each one of your tools by clicking on this little annotation symbol at the top left here. So if you click on that, you can then add a note. I'm going to say get rid of columns that had A and B. And why do I recommend doing this? This is because if someone was to ever go back to your workflow and want to make changes to your workflow, by adding this description, they can basically tell what the tool is doing before actually going in and digging into the configuration menu. It can also be useful for you if you just haven't been back to this workflow for a few months and you don't 100% remember what's going on. Well, if you just add a little annotation there, it's going to make things a lot more easier to review. And the third use case that we see as to why you want to label this is if you're ever being audited by an external party or an internal party, and you want them to know what's happening at each step of the way, it's great for audits. All right, so what are we going to do next? Well, we have to deal with 2 different issues here. The first is we still need to rename our headers because F2, F4, F6 are not very compelling headers. And then we also need to rearrange our data. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take another sample tool. And this time with this sample tool, we're going to take the first 2 rows. So first 2 rows. We're going to see what that looks like. Okay, so now we just have the first 2 rows of our data set. And you'll notice this bachelor also belongs to this October 19th, not just October 18th. So we're going to look at a interesting way to add this bachelor to October 19th, add this 1 bedroom to October 19th, and so on and so forth. To do that, we're going to use a tool called a Transpose tool. So Transpose is something that a lot of Excel users know how to do. Well, you can also do it in Alteryx. And it's a tool that I like to use during these webinars because it's something that people in Alteryx are familiar with. Okay, so I'm going to take this Transpose tool, I'll bring it in to my workflow. And let's take a look at this configuration menu. Okay, it says select data to transform. You have something called a key column, in something called a data column. Okay, when I first started with Alteryx, I was a little confused as to what these actually meant. And someone actually showed me a really useful feature on how you can understand what tools do. So if you click on a tool at the top here, there's actually a little description that says what the tool does. But even more important than that, there's a little link, hyperlink here that says open example. So when you click on open example, we've now entered a new workflow. And this is a pre-built workflow by Alteryx that basically helps you understand what's going on in our data set. So I open the summarize tool. I actually want to open the transpose tool. Okay, so we get a nice description of what this transpose tool does. We get a few different use cases of what the transpose tool does. We get even some graphics of what's going on in this transpose tool. And we can see that, okay, we have this new data set here, which is just a data set that Alteryx has brought in. We have our products by category, suggested age range, average monthly sales, and then each monthly sale. So if we were to do a basic example of a transpose, by putting our key columns as the product category, suggested age range, average monthly sales, we can see that we've effectively pivoted our data from before it was like this. Now we've pivoted our data, and the data columns that were actually used were just all the months. So we get our months in a nice name column and our values in our value column. Okay, so this is the basic idea of how I basically learned all the tools in Alteryx, is you can look at examples and of how this tool reacts to different data and different configuration combinations. Okay, so I'm going to close this, and let's go back to our workflow. So in this case, what we're going to do is we're actually not going to have any key columns, and you'll see why in a second. We're just going to have our data columns. I'll click on Run. And effectively what we've done is we've done a transpose of all of our data in a traditional sense, which is something you'll see a lot in Excel. So I basically just transpose literally all of our data. And this is because this shape of data actually synergizes really well with a tool called the multi-row formula. So if I click on multi-row formula and bring it in, we'll get a bunch of different configuration options. So this is a very powerful tool in Alteryx. It basically allows you to go row by row in your data and change the value of a cell depending on a condition from another cell. So in this case, the condition that we're going to look to create is if a cell is null here, we're going to actually make it equal to the top cell. So we're going to make this null actually be equal to what this is in this cell, effectively solving our header issue where we had a bunch of nulls in our headers. Okay, so to do that with the multi-row tool, what we're going to do is we're going to use an expression called replace. Okay, so, or not replace, we're going to use an expression called an if statement. So a lot of people have seen if statements in Excel. If statements are also very popular in Alteryx. To access these if statements for this multi-row tool, we're going to click on functions and then conditional. With conditional, we can click on if C, then T, else F, and if. So very similar to what you can see in Excel. So if C is true, then do T, else F. So we're going to say if is null value, then we're going to click on this variable here. We're going to go to row -1, and then we're going to click on row -1 value. else, we're going to say value. Okay, so I'm going to go through what exactly this is saying. So if our value column is null, so if this value column is null, then we're going to give it the row -1's value. Else, we're going to just keep the value. Okay, so I'll show you what the output actually looks like. We have a little error here. Oh, I got to change this to update existing field. And we're going to change it to value. Run. Okay, so let's look at this bottom data here. Let's see what happens before and after. So before, we have a bunch of nulls in our data set. Under bachelor, we have a null. But now, after using this multi-row formula tool, we now have bachelor showing up because the value before that null was bachelor. All right, so now that our data is pivoted like this, we want to basically unpivot it. And to do that, there's another tool called a Crosstab tool. So it's again in our transform palette, but it's Crosstab. You can see it basically just looks like a brother of our Transpose tool. But basically, we're going to use this to unpivot our data to something that we had before. So let's do concatenate. That's all I have to do for this tool. I'm going to run. And now we have our data in a horizontal form instead of a vertical form. And we've also concatenated our two data points together. So we have a bachelor for October 18th, a bachelor for October 19th, and so on and so forth. And you can see this is starting to get very close to what we'd like to have for the header of our finished data. Okay. So I know that was a whole lot, guys. Don't worry if you feel a little overwhelmed. I promise you the documentation and everything in Alteryx is really easy to understand. And for those of you who are really interested in the formulas that I just used, feel free to in your trial to use this tool, the formula tool. Okay, so I'll bring this formula tool in. And I want to basically introduce you to this tool because it makes learning formulas a lot easier. The first thing you want to do with your formula tool is select an output column. So let's add a column here. Let's call it new call. And what you want to do is let's select to select a field. Basically, I'm gonna click on a left bracket, and then I have all my different fields that automatically show up here. So let's do F2, this first bachelor, October 18th. And let's say you wanted to replace the comma here in bachelor 18th with an underscore. Well, we can bring a replace function here. So I just type the start of replace, and we get a replace function that appears. It says string, target, and replacement. So if you click on that, you now have a template of what we're looking for. So the string that we're going to change is F2. That is the field that we're looking at. The target that we want to change is a comma. So in brackets, I've just written down a comma, and then the replacement that we're going to replace it with is brackets underscore. Okay, so this is a really great way to start to learn formulas in Alteryx. If you're really into formulas in Excel, you will love this, I promise you. And we'll see when we run this tool what happens we now have a new column here with bachelor underscore October 18th. So this is because I created a new column, but what if I just wanted to make the replacement in the F2 column? Well, instead of writing a output column of F2, I could also just say F2 as the output column, and I'll run this. Now we can see our F2 has been replaced. We now have an underscore instead of a comma. Okay, so that's a very simple use case of using this formula tool. There's actually a way we can use this formula tool across every single one of our columns, and that is a tool called the multi-field formula tool. So multi-field formula tool is really great if you need to make this kind of replacement across all of your fields. With this tool, you can select the fields that you want to update. So let's do update existing field. We want to update all of our fields. Just 1 second. This is a multi-row. I mean multi-field. Okay, here we go. Okay. So first you need to select the type of fields that you'd like to modify. So in this case, I'd like to modify all the text fields in my data set. And then you can actually choose what fields in these text fields you'd like to modify. So in this case, we're going to do it for all. We're going to remove the copy for the outputted fields. And then the expression that we're going to use for this field is very similar to the one that we just created in this formula tool. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy and paste this expression that we just created in our formula tool. I'm going to bring it into my multi-field formula. I'm going to paste it into this expression. And now, instead of just doing it on our one F2 field, I'm actually going to add it to all of our fields. And to do that, you click on this little plus next to current field, and we select current field. So this is a dynamic name for each one of your fields, and it's basically going to do this for every single one of your field. And then the replacement target that we have is still good. So if we click on run here, we can see the difference as to what happens. We now have underscores instead of commas in each one of our fields because we use this multi-field formula. Okay, so with that, this formula tool was just being used as a way to showcase formulas. But in this case, I'm actually going to delete it and just bring this tool up, and it's no problem. All right, so I'm looking at the time here. We don't have a whole lot more time, so I'm actually going to speed up a little bit. To make these rows be equal to your headers, you can actually use a tool called Dynamic Rename. And this Dynamic Rename tool is, I believe, in the developer palette, but I want to show you another way to access tools, and that is with the search bar at the top here. So if I just type in dynamic, I'll get a whole bunch of different options that I can access. In this case, Dynamic Rename is here. You can actually drag and drop it right into your workflow. So this is a really nice feature because I don't always want to go to every palette. If I just know the name of my tool, I might just go to my search bar and bring it in. Okay, so I'm going to connect this to my Dynamic Rename tool. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say take field names from my first row of data. And when I run this tool, you can see the output here. Now we have 0 records in our data, but our headers are all the our headers are now what our first rows were. Okay, and now we need to connect the data, our actual data set, to our headers. So how can we do that? Well, we're going to go back to our original data here. And we're going to use a sample tool to this time skip the first 2 rows of our data set. so that now we have our data that's ready for headers. But before that, I want to show you guys something, and that's the importance of choosing the right type for your columns, the right data type for your column. So to view the types of your columns, you can use a select tool. It's actually going to show you the type here. It says v-string for every single one of our fields. If we wanted to change this to say numeric type, such as like a fixed decimal or a float, you can do it easily from a select tool, or there's a handy tool called autofield. What autofield does is it Alteryx attempts to give your data the smallest amount, the lowest storage data type that your column is capable of. So if we bring in another select tool after this tool to see what happens, when I run this, we'll now see that my data is now being shown as a string. Instead of that V string, it's now coming in as a string. And you'll notice something, that the size is a lot different. So the size of a string is 4, while a size of a V string is 255. So effectively by doing this, we basically reduced the memory footprint of our data by like 20 times or something like that, right? Like 10 times, which is pretty crazy with just one tool. And this isn't that important with this data set because it's not that big, but if you're working with several gigabytes of data, you might want to keep that in mind to just run this autofield tool through it. That way your computer will perform better when it's working with big data. Okay, now we're going to use a union tool here. We're going to drag in our 2 data sets into this union tool. We're going to select auto config by position. So I just jumped over this tool a little bit. I just want to show you what the output actually looks of it. Basically what we've done is we've taken our 2 data sets, so our first and our second data set, and we stacked them on top of each other. So now we have our new headers as well as our data at the bottom here. Okay, one thing I like to do when I have a process in place that is working, I like to use a tool container. So I'm going to drag this tool container in. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all my tools that I've had so far. I'm going to put it in this container. And this is a way for you to organize your workflow. You can name this container prepare and join. And what you're able to do with this container is you can move it around, you can minimize it to make it smaller so you can organize your workflows better. And just imagine a ton of containers in your workflow connecting to one another and it being super organized. This is something that as an organized person, I really enjoy. Okay, we still have a few problems with our data before we can bring it into Tableau. The first is we have these stars in our data set that we'd like to get rid of. Okay, but we have these stars, and then the other one is we have a line here down here that says Ontario 10 plus 1,000. Let's say you actually want to get rid of this line. Well, you can use something called a filter tool. A filter tool is very similar to what you do in Excel. So I'll bring in this filter tool. And I'm going to say the column that I want to filter is the first center column. We're going to say contains 10. So if it contains 10, return true. If it does not contain 10, return false. And you'll notice there's 2 output anchors of this filter tool. The first is a true, the second is a false. In our true, we have that Ontario 10 plus 1,000. So we want to get rid of that one, so that's good. And then our false has the rest of our data. What we can do now is basically continue with this false anchor and leave this true anchor behind. Okay. The other thing that we want to do is get rid of these stars in our data. So we could use a filter, but the issue is it would get rid of the entire row of the starred data. So one thing we have to do is basically pivot our data again. So this time we're going to use another transpose tool. We're going to connect it to the false anchor of our filter tool. I'm going to choose center as a key column. Now, when I run this, our data is basically now coming in as for each center and each bedroom type and date, we have an average. We have an average rent. And if we scroll down a little bit here, we now should see some stars appear. Yeah, there's some stars right here. So now we can just plug and play another filter tool. So you could get rid of this filter tool. You could bring in another filter tool, or you can also copy and paste any tools that are in your workflow. So I'm going to copy paste my filter tool. I'm going to just change it up a little bit. So I'm going to say the column that I want to filter on is value. I'm going to say is not equal. So let's say does not equal double star. When I click on that and run it, we now have our data here. In the false, we have all our star data, and then in the true anchor, we have all of our true data. Okay, so now if we want to split this name column to basically have one column for the type of unit and one column for our dates, we can also do that. So I'm going to take this split tool called text to columns tool. I'm going to bring it to my true anchor. The column that I'd like to split on is name, and the delimiter I'm going to use is 2. The number of columns I'm going to output is 2. When I run this tool, we now have 2 new columns. One is the type of unit that we have, and one is the date that we have. Then we can use a select tool to rename these columns. So let's get rid of now our name field first. Let's call this one unit type, and let's call this one unit date. And when I run this, we now have our unit date and our unit call. All right, so the last thing that we're going to do before importing this to Tableau is we're going to take these unit dates and we're going to actually modify this. So people who have worked with data for a long time know that working with dates is really a tough challenge, especially in Python or Excel. It's just something that kind of grinds our gears, or at least for me, it really does. Alteryx makes this process as easy as possible with a tool called datetime. So with datetime, what you can do is you can actually choose the format that your date is coming in as, and then output it to the standard date time. So in this case, we have a ton of different formats that Alteryx already has preset for us, or there's also a custom format. So if you're interested in the custom format notation, if you just Google Alteryx dates notation, you can actually get this website here. Let me just pull this up. You can get this website here that has all the formats and the result of what that date looks like. I encourage you guys to take a look at that. So just Google Alteryx datetime functions and you'll get this table. What we're going to do here is we're actually going to look at our data. So the data is coming in as a month in a 3-letter format, and then a year in a 2-number format. So what we're going to do is we're going to type !B. That is the notation for a date with 3 letters. And then there's a dash, so we're going to add that dash. And then the notation for just an 18 or 19 for a year is YY. So I'll type in YY. And here you can see we have the example of what if our data looks like this. This is what the output is going to give us. And this output is the exact date type that you want to work with in Tableau. That's why it's so important. So we'll do this, we'll run it, and we'll see what our new date looks like. It says that there's an error here. Let me just take a look. Oh, I'm not converting the right date, so we'll do unit date. And now we have a new column here that says date time out. We can get rid of our old date column by using a select tool, getting rid of our unit date. Let's rename this to date. And now our data set is now ready to be exported to Tableau, where we have our location, our value, our unit type, and our date. And actually, the last thing we can do is actually just rename these columns to make it easier. So let's do location, average rent, unit type is fine, date is fine. And here we go. To export to Tableau, very quick, what we can do is go to this in and out tool. We can go to the output data, bring it in. And what Tableau is, what you're looking for here is a Tableau data extract or a Tableau hyperfile. So if you click on hyperfile, you can actually choose where you export this data to. So if we do Ontario rent, we can now run this. And our data is now going to show up in our folder called Ontario rent. Alternatively, if you have a Tableau server, you can also get a plugin that can output directly to your Tableau server. So send us an email if you want more information on that if you have a Tableau server. And now if I take this Tableau, if I launch a fresh Tableau instance, I can just easily drag and drop the file that we just created from our Alteryx workflow and put it into Tableau so it's ready to be used in Tableau. Now this is really great because if you have any changes that you need to make to your workflow or you want to add new data, you can just add it to your workflow, run your workflow, open up your Tableau workbook, and your data changes will be live. So that's the synergy that we see a lot with Alteryx and Tableau, and it's a very common use case that we'll see in Alteryx and Tableau. So if you want more information on anything Alteryx or anything on Tableau, feel free to give us a shout. I'm going to pass the mic back to Sophie here. I'm sorry, Sophie, I know I'm cutting into your time a little bit here.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jason.
I was just going to make a comment. Awesome demonstration, Jason. I thought you did a fantastic job of showing the ease of use of connecting to data, performing some pretty drastic transformations, and then simply outputting it to Tableau. Well done, man.
Thank you, Mark.
Fantastic. I know, Jason, before we dive into the last slides, we did have one question that came up.
Absolutely.
How is Alteryx different than Tableau Prep?
Yeah, sure. So in my mind, Alteryx is more of a mature product than Tableau Prep. Tableau Prep has just recently been developed and the functionality is a little lacking. Like they don't have all the tools and functionality and also community that Alteryx has. So I think that's the main difference.
Yeah, and I'd be happy to add to that as well. Tableau is fantastic, and we partner very, very closely with Tableau. So many of the folks that you've been working with, right? If it's Ricardo or Sean, we work very, very closely with them. So I think Tableau would be the again, just like we'll claim certainly not to be a reporting tool or visualization tool. We have those types of features within the reporting category. But I think Tableau would also say the advanced analytics and data prep and blend and enhance capabilities are far superior within Alteryx. And I think, again, purpose of the meeting, right? The synergies between the two platforms is a very, very powerful message as it relates to delivering the promise of self-service data analytics. So yeah, a great question though. I can't get that quite a bit.
Mark, do you have any questions that came in on your chat that we should address now?
Nope, just some statements and requests to reach out. So thank you for those.
Perfect. We have a couple more slides to go over. If you do have any more questions, pop those in there. I want to make sure we get to them. I know that we're over time. I'm just going to quickly go through these. If you don't have a chance to put in the chat window what your question is, In the follow-up emails that you'll be getting, feel free to reply back, and we're happy to help you out with any of those. So just as a little bit of a reminder, if you'd like an extended trial or like to get set up with that 30-day guided trial, feel free to reach out. We do offer complimentary workforce building help through our office hours, so we're happy to help out with that as well. And if you're looking for more formal training, we can also provide you some options around that, which actually brings us to our next slide. Did not think this was the next slide. Never mind. This is another upcoming event that we have. This is going to be next week. This is showcasing some of the latest functionality that Alteryx has released within the predictive palette in terms of machine learning and natural language processing. So it's a really cool session to join in to learn about some of the latest and greatest in terms of Alteryx's latest release. Next slide, Jason. And this is a follow-up on that. So this is a new offering that we have in regards to that new functionality that Alteryx has released in terms of machine learning boot camps. So they're offered in 2 different formats, 3 half-days or 5 half-days. We'll send over this information if anybody is interested in diving in deeper into that functionality within Alteryx, whether if you're an existing user or if you're looking to get into that area in terms of Alteryx, this is a great place to start. I didn't get any more questions. This was it for me. We'll provide all this information with the follow-ups. You'll either be getting it from Mark or myself. Mark, did you have anything else that you want to add? Well, you know what? I think I got one more question about if this is being recorded. Yes, it's being recorded, and it will be shared as well. Mark, could you unmute Rick? I don't know if you saw that request.
Oh, sorry, I did not, no. Let me pop in here, sorry. And yeah, for sure this will be recorded, and I'll make sure to include that into the follow-up email. And Rick, you are now on as a panelist unmuted.
Yeah, hi, I just want to say hi, this is Rick. I work with the Ministry of Environment. I help run the Tableau user group, and also I set up last year an Alteryx user group within the OPS. So if you're interested, just reach out to me. I have an alias email. It's ricm@ontario.ca. I also wanted to mention that Alteryx also made it onto the VOR, not just for data prep and stuff like that, but there were 10 capabilities on the last VOR that came out in 2018, and they qualified both for statistical modeling, machine learning, and visual analytics and reporting, which is what you've seen here today. So yeah, and yeah, so if anybody wants to reach out to myself, Mark, or Sophie, feel free to do so. The capabilities of Alteryx are really endless. Even though I run the Tableau user group, I've never used Tableau Prep. I've seen it in action many times, but by using Alteryx, it's completely changed my life. The only 2 tools that have changed my life so far are Tableau and Alteryx, and you just can never look back after that. So anyways, that's my little plug. But if you need any information, feel free to reach out to us. All right, guys, by the way, that was a great demo.
But Rick, too bad we saved you for 5 minutes after, for goodness sake. I really appreciate the kind words, and of course, all of the support that you provided and all the great work that you've shared with us. So thank you for that.
Okay, no problem.
Excellent. Well, I will not keep anyone a minute more over rather. So I think expect to get an email from Sophie with a recording and some next steps. But I think we've really hammered the point home. If you do have any questions, or Sophie or I or Jason can help in any way, please do not hesitate to reach out. We're more than happy to. Thanks so much for the time, and have a great afternoon.
Thanks. Bye-bye.